Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards, and they're going to give you a little update on what their office is currently working on. So thank you all, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I'm sharing my screen now. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we see it in editing mode.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, great. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Morning to others. My name is Rhonda Wright, and I am with the EPA Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards, and we are located in the Research Triangle Park. Before I get started, I just wanted to introduce myself for those of you who do not know me. Back in fall of 2018, I was asked by my office to be the small business liaison. And so we have been working over the past years to develop a strategic plan to implement a program within our office where we are better supporting the small businesses on our regulatory actions. As of today, we have drafted a strategic plan, and we have briefed it up to my office director, and we are now ready to start implementing the actions in those plans. On this Friday, hopefully you all will be still in attendance to this virtual training, because my division director, Anna Wood, will be speaking at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time, and she will lay out and give a high-level overview of what those actions are, the things that we are trying to implement in our office to better support the small businesses. So hopefully you all be able to join in back on this Friday at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time to hear from my director, Anna Wood. Today we do have two speakers, and they're going to, Nabanita Modak will be speaking on the OSWE rule, and then Adam Baumgart-Getz will be speaking on the learning management system, formerly known as ELearning. Before we get started though, I do want to give you a list of rules that are coming out of our office, just to give you a heads up. A lot of things that we try to do and be more intentional about is to make sure that you are aware of the rules that are coming out of OSWE. That way, once you have an idea of what to expect, if you would like to have further engagement or more detailed engagement, such as having a rule writer onto your calls, onto this the SBEAP technical subcommittee calls, we can make that available for you if possible. So I'm going to move to my next slide. So what you see here, I have two slides here, and this will be provided to you on the website, hopefully. And these are a list of rules that are coming through, and this just gives you a general idea of when you can expect to see these rules either proposed or go final. I want to give a disclaimer that any rules that are in the color black text, those dates are subject to change. On the next slide, you will see that we do have some dates that are red colored. That means those dates are court ordered, and those dates will not change. So just to give you an idea here, the MM2A rule, we are still anticipating that rule to be signed this fall. We also anticipate the addition to the 1BP to list to the Clean Air Act. That will also happen hopefully by winter of this year. And then so forth and so on. A couple of things that I want to point out is like ETO. We are starting a SBAR panel, a Small Business Advocacy Review panel on the ETO commercial sterilizer rule. And that should be happening soon as well. And then I want to point out that there's a boilers, area source and major source review, which is called the 610 review. Basically what that means is when those rules went final 10 years ago, they were identified as rules that had significant impact to small entities. As a result of that, according to the Regulatory Flexibility Act, those rules have to be reviewed every 10 years to see if we have or we are going to make any changes to the rules based off of petitions or comments that we have received following the rule signature. So those rules opened up a review through the spring regulatory agenda, and they're getting ready to close out this fall. And so we'll know more what's going to happen with those two rules shortly. As I move forward to the next slide, the air quality designations is getting ready to go be completed by the end of this year. There were many questions about the ozone designations. Many of you should have received email notification from me regarding the ozone standard, the office retaining that standard. So you do not see where we are initiating designations on ozone, because what generally happens according to the Clean Air Act is that if there is no new or revised standard, that does not trigger designations. And so as I mentioned, ozone, we are proposing to retain that standard. And because we're retaining that standard, that will not trigger a ozone designations. We did just complete a public hearings on the ozone standard. And hopefully if you wanted to participate in that process, you were able to do so. The last few rules that I have listed here, you will notice that these are all RTRs, also known as Risk and Technology Review. And they're all court ordered to be signed or go final by October 1, 2021, so next year. But we're hoping to propose those RTRs by fall of this year. So again, all of these rules will be available to you to take a look at. And if you want any more information or more detailed discussions on a particular rule, here's my contact information to just email me or give me a phone call and let me know so that we can get the right persons onto the calls, whether it's on the SBEAP technical subcommittee calls, or we can do a special call with you just to talk about a specific rule. So I just want to run those rules through to you real briefly before I turn it over to our next speaker, which will be Nabanita, who will give you an overview of the OSWE rule. So at this time, Nabanita, feel free to go ahead and share your screen and you can get started.
Thank you, Rhonda. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a small introduction about myself. I have been with UPS for little over 5 years now, writing combustion-related rules, mostly in the field of incineration. Before that, I was in the Office of Research and Development of EPA, doing my postdoctoral research in combustion. So pretty much combustion has been my expertise, starting from the graduate school, doing my doctorate, and then finally ending up writing rules in the combustion field. I am currently heading 2 major incineration rules, which is one is other solid waste incineration, and the other one is the commercial and industrial solid waste incineration rule, which is SBEAP, which many of the big industries are affected. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to present this rule, because I think that's a big opportunity for us to reach out to you and let you know that you might be one of the stakeholders who have interest in this particular rule, because this rule is going to regulate, at least what we believe, the small industries. So as you say, we call it OSWE, and OSWE stands for Other Solid Waste Incinerators. And this is a review rule which has been ordered by a code, by the code, district code. It's Clean Air Act Section 129 requirements. We are going to do a quick overview about what incinerators will be covered under the OSWE rule, the little regulatory history, how this rule came into effect, the code order deadlines we have for this rule. As I mentioned, this is a code ordered rule. The OSWE review proposal highlights. We recently proposed the rule. The rule got published in the Federal Register on August 31st, which was last Monday. That was the court order deadline for the proposal, and our deadline for the final is approaching pretty soon. The proposed changes, what changes we have proposed based on the review of the OSWE rule, the stakeholder engagement, and our comment period, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you have at the end of my presentation. So Clean Air Act, you might be very familiar with, as Rhonda was talking about, Section 111, the FM2A, Section 112, the boiler rule. Another section is Section 129, and Section 129 usually covers the non-hazardous solid waste combustion. So if you have a burn barrel, you take waste from your household, from your neighbors, and put it in that burn barrel, that would be covered by Section 129 of the Clean Air Act. And that's why, you know, the small business, the tribes, the small cities, counties, the law enforcement official use them a lot to basically burn the daily waste, which we call municipal waste. Section 129 have some very specific and prescriptive guidelines. And when I say prescriptive, that means the Clean Air Act doesn't give us much of a wiggle room. It does tell us that we are supposed to regulate dioxin furans, lead, cadmium, mercury, hydrogen chloride, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, NOx, and opacity. And we do have to develop numerical standards. So everyone who has the burn barrel, who is using for their small business to burn the waste they are generating in their site, has to comply with those emission limits for those 9 pollutants and opacity. Unlike Section 112 of Clean Air Act or Section 111 of Clean Air Act, we do not allow, and when I say we do not, the Clean Air Act does not allow work practice standard. So as an example, you cannot just monitor the temperature of a waste stream and tell us, okay, the temperature is within the limit of 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and thus I meet the emission limit of sulfur dioxide, which often happens in 112. You know, you have a surrogate or you have work practice standard, which you do, you control the flow rate, you control the temperature, and you tell us, okay, this is the temperature range, this is the flow rate, and this is how we know that we are meeting the emission standard of a particular pollutant. But that doesn't happen in Section 129. Section 129 will tell you, are you meeting 2 ppm for particulate matter? And you have to come and show EPA, yes, this is our data, and this data indicates we are meeting 2 ppm for particulate matter. That's just an example. We do require federal operating permits, which is a Title V permit. So this is basically a 40,000 feet overview of Section 129 rules. And this review and revise, which we are doing for the other solid waste incineration rule, is also required by the Clean Air Act, where they ask us to do a 5 years review of the rule. Now, which incinerators are covered under the other solid waste incineration rule? The 2020 August 31st proposal covers 2 kinds of incinerators. The first type is called very small municipal waste combustor. And very small means if you burn less than 35 tons per day, it could be 1 tons per day, 2 tons per day, 34.9999 tons per day of municipal solid waste. And that municipal solid waste is 30% of the waste, more than 30% of the waste you are burning. That will be a very small municipal waste combustor, and that will be regulated by the other solid waste incineration rule. So as I said, it could be municipal solid waste combustor are examples of, you know, a small business has a very small incinerator like burn barrel on their property. and they are using it to burn whatever waste they are generated on that particular premise of that small business. Or a tribal village, they are using it for whatever they are gathering, and a small town. A municipal waste combustor could be a combustor, a burn barrel owned by law enforcement officials. So it depends what kind of combustor they have and what they are burning. And municipal waste means, as I have written on my slides, it's basically taken from the Clean Air Act. It's collected from general public, from residential, commercial, institutional, and industrial sources, consisting of paper, wood, yard waste, food wastes, plastics, leather, rubber, and other combustible materials and non-combustible materials. So you see, it kind of includes everything of a household waste. So that would be a very small municipal waste combustor. The second type, what this rule intends to regulate, is institutional waste incinerator. That would be an incinerator which a national park has, or a prison might have, a school might have, a church might have, or a lab might have. They have on their facility an incinerator, and they generate waste because church generates waste, prison generates waste, national park generates waste. So those incinerators are called institutional waste incinerator. OSWE covers incinerator that ranges in sophistication from burn barrels to state-of-the-art units. So we really don't care about how sophisticated the units are. It literally can be just a 55-gallon drum, which we call burn barrel, and you come across those many in the villages and all. So those could be also units, and you also come across a very state-of-the-art incinerator which properly built stacks in it. And then they have proper air control going on. So everything could be OSWE. OSWE also covers air curtain incinerator that burns municipal solid waste, institutional waste, wood waste, clean lumber, yard waste, or mixture of those clean lumber, wood, and yard waste. You often come across those kind of air curtain incinerator in disaster recovery area, or where there is a debris going on and then you want to burn those debris. You come across those air curtain incinerators in national park. They want to clean up the woods and the debris caused by certain things. So those are the air curtain incinerators. We do have special relaxation in the OSWE rule for those kind of incinerators. One thing I must mention here, the court order deadline, which was August 31st, 2020 for the proposal, left the agency with a very short span of time to collect data. So we developed a limited inventory based on the internet research because we did not have the time to reach out to the stakeholder and do an information collection request. We also tried to go to the state permit database when it was available. Based on the limited inventory, we have noticed that most OSWE units are, majority of them are owned by small businesses and the tribes. And which is why I consider this is a great opportunity to reach out to you and then engage you in this rulemaking because, as I said, based on the limited inventory, we do think that some of you might own some of the units, and you might want to participate during this comment period and let us know your thoughts, your feedback, your input, so that we are much more informed, because we are kind of having this disability of time because of this very tight court order deadline. So the regulatory history, back in 2005, December 16, the original OSWE rule was promulgated. Now, other solid waste incinerator rule, like any other Section 129 rule of the Clean Air Act, regulates the new sources and the existing sources. And the rule defines that what will be a new source and what will be an existing source. Now, for new sources, like any other NSPS, mostly it is implemented through state delegation. So state takes the delegation and state implements new source performance standards. For the existing sources, which is very similar to 111D, section 111D is like, we have to have a state plan, or EPA has to promulgate a federal plan to implement the emission guidelines in order to regulate the existing sources. We did propose a federal plan back in 2006, December 18, 2006, but we never finalized it. So that emission guideline of 2005 rule never got implemented. After 2005 rule was promulgated in 2006, the environmental group, Sierra Club, petitioned for judicial review of the OSWE rule because they were not happy of the certain specification of the OSWE rule. On April 21st, 2016, the court granted EPA's request to take voluntary remand because we had a lot of back and forth going on with the environmental group, a lot of discussion, and then we finally decided to take a voluntary remand of the entire rule. Now, when I say voluntary remand, that doesn't mean that we are rescinding the rule. We are just saying the rule is still in effect, but we are going to fix certain part of the rule, and that's called a voluntary remand because EPA took it by themselves. That's why it's called a voluntary remand. However, we got sued by Sierra Club on the technology review for not meeting our deadline because we were supposed to do a technology review or the review and revise as Clean Air Act specified back in 2010. So we got sued by the environmental group not doing that review as Clean Air Act dictates us, and we lost the case. So on September 14, 2018, the court ordered EPA to review and revise the OSWE standards and guidelines. And they put us on deadline. They told us that we must publish the proposal by August 31st, 2020, which is why you would see the proposal now, and the comment period has started. And we have to finalize this rule by May 31st, 2021. So what are the highlights? We have, as I said, that the court has ordered us to review and revise, and then we have identified an inventory of the units based on our internet search and the state permit database whenever it was available. We have done an evaluation of the process and control technologies. From the limited data available and based on our evaluation, we did not identify any new developments in practices, process, or control technology for any OSWE units. So based on the 5-year review, based on the methodology we have adopted to conduct this 5 years review, we did not believe that any changes to the OSWE standards were appropriate, or accordingly, the EPA has not proposed any changes based on that review. However, as I mentioned, that EPA has taken a voluntary remand to fix certain aspects of the OSWE rule that was originally promulgated in 2005. So part of that remand we wanted to address, and we are proposing various changes to address that remand, which EPA took back in 2016 and the court granted it. So the proposed changes as I mentioned before, we have 2 subcategories: very small municipal waste combustor, which are less than 35 tons per day, burning mostly municipal waste combusting, more than 30% municipal waste. Another one is institutional waste incinerator. So the first change we said that, hey, under this very small municipal waste combustor and institutional waste combustor, we are going to divide them into 2 further subcategories. One will be more than 10 tons per day. So if you have a unit which is burning waste and the capacity is more than 10, but less than 35 TPD, there will be one subcategory. Another one will be smaller than or equal 10 tons per day. So this is one change we have done. We have further subcategorized based on the size of the incinerators. And why is it important? I will explain it a little, further down in my bullets. We have revised and redetermined some of the emission limits with the OSWE units that have capacity smaller than or equal to 10 tons per day. So that's where it comes, why this size category are important. Because when you have more than 10 tons per day versus less than 10 tons per day, they actually have very different design. The way they combust is very different. So we went ahead and revised the emission limits for the smaller size, means which the units which are less than or equal to 10 tons per day. We have gone ahead and revised the emission limits for those units. We have also introduced increased testing and monitoring flexibilities, because less than 10 tons per day often have a very basic design, very rudimentary design. They often don't have a control technology. They also may not have a properly built stack to conduct stack testing. So accordingly, we wanted to incorporate those features into our testing and monitoring specification. So we went ahead and introduced a great amount of flexibilities in the testing and monitoring for those units who are less than 10 tons per day or equal to 10 tons per day. We have, since it is mostly owned by small businesses, the tribes, we also realized the record keeping and reporting flexibilities required in order to keep up with these regulatory provisions. So we have introduced increased record keeping and reporting flexibilities to be consistent with our device testing and monitoring. There are also some of the applicability provisions we have changed because we have revised some of the definition how the previous OSWE rule has looked into. So under the revised definition, if you are a commercial facilities and you think, oh, I'm a commercial facility, so I should be regulated under the commercial industrial solid waste incineration rule. We are saying, no, your applicability has changed. You may be a commercial facility, but you are burning municipal solid waste or municipal type solid waste like paper, cardboard, food waste, the other rubbers, plastics, which are generated in your facility. And these are municipal type solid waste as Clean Air Act has defined. So you might be a business property, you might be a commercial facility, but you are burning this kind of waste. So you will be regulated under the OSWE rules. So that's how we have revised the applicability provision. We have, to be consistent with EPA's current position about the startup shutdown and malfunction, we have revised that provision. We have also been consistent with the electronic reporting, which to streamline the reporting requirement. The federal permitting requirement, as I said, that section 129 requires every unit to have a Title V permit. But we are saying if you are an air curtain incinerator, which are burning only wood waste, yard waste, and clean lumber, you will not be required to have a Title V requirement. So if you are a special kind of air curtain incinerator under OSWE rule, you will not be required to obtain a Title V permit. And there are other technical edits which are specified and described in the preamble of the rule. So stakeholder engagement, I would like to emphasize on that, especially, as I said, based on the limited information we have gathered, we believe most OSWE units are owned by small businesses and tribes. And since we did not have enough time to conduct an information collection request, reach out individually to every stakeholder, send them letters, send them a notification that this rule is going to be, coming, and please send us some data if you have any. We did not have the time to do it because the court order deadline was the biggest thing we had to meet here. We want to use this opportunity of comment period where we are doing this outreach. We also want to use the public hearing platform. And speaking of public hearing, today is the last date to submit your public hearing request. And I strongly encourage you to be engaged with EPA. Please let us hear your thoughts. Let us hear your input. What kind of units you have? What kind of impediments you think, these units, if these units are gone, or considering that EPA has introduced so much of flexibility for the smaller units, what do you think that is being implemented? What are your questions, concerns, comments? Because those are important for us. Those are important for us to make an final informed rule so that we can address your concern, respond to your comments, take your inputs into our rulemaking, and be engaged, because the best way we can make a better rule which works for the regulator and works for the stakeholder when we work collaboratively and we are transparent in our communication, understand. And if you don't reach out to us and let us know about the units you are using, we have no way to know it. So that's why I strongly encourage you to be engaged. Our comment period has started on August 31st, the day it got published in Federal Register. We have 45 days comment period. It will end on October 15th. You are more than welcome, and as I said, you are strongly encouraged to submit comments. Please do so. And also informative comments with data-based, like, as I said, what kind of units do you have? Do you know the design? If you don't know the design, send us the picture. What kind of waste do you burn? How often do you burn those waste? Do you see the rule becoming an impediment in order for you to do that? If you don't, do you have any alternative means of waste disposal? Also, like, what all things you use that particular unit for. So these are the things you'd like to submit comments for. And if you want a public hearing, please do so by submitting your request. And the preamble, the first few pages, tells you exactly who you should reach out to request public hearing. And today by midnight, you should submit the public hearing request. And public hearing, if we get a public hearing request, we will hold a public hearing on September 15th. You can get the proposed rule, every information on proposed rulemaking on this particular website. I believe Rhonda has shared these slides with you. So please go through the rule. I'm always there to respond to your comments and questions, but I'll strongly encourage you to submit the comments in the docket, because that is the most formal way to do it. And that's how we get to know what the stakeholders are thinking about. The next slides are for technical contact. As I said, here is my email, or please submit your comment to Rhonda, and here is her email. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. And I also wanted to let you know that I have to jump onto another meeting as soon as I finish it. So if you think of any other questions after I step out, please feel free to email me or email Rhonda, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, so we'll wait until the end to take questions. So I think we'll move on to Adam, and then we'll take questions all together.
Okay, so as I said, I have to step off. Please feel free to email me the questions or to Rhonda.
Yes, Lisa, is it okay that we go ahead and answer some of the questions that have popped up on the screen before Nabanita drops off?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and Nabanita, I will also tell you that as a co-host panelist, you have access to the question answer and you are able to answer some of these if we don't get to them all.
Okay.
Otherwise, we will email them to you. But you can see the first one from Angela says many crematory companies for human animals have been using emission factors from EPA AP 42, refuge combustion. They reference tables. These do not seem to be the most appropriate emission factors. Do you have suggestions on what emission factors EPA recommends and if any rules guidance are forthcoming for this industry sector?
So the human crematories are not regulated by other solid waste incineration rule. So that's not something this rule is going to address.
Okay, our next question is from Donovan. And he said that especially for air curtain incinerators, will this group be automatically considered a major source? And I believe you addressed that in your presentation where you talked about splitting those emissions into two groups. But do you want to answer that further?
Yes. So, one thing Section 129 does, which is again, unlike the Section 112 and 111, we don't distinguish between major and minor source. So the court told us, and the Clean Air Act told us, if you have any unit burn any amount of waste, and waste is defined by the Solid Waste Disposal Act of the Office of Solid Waste. If you meet the definition of solid waste, again, non-hazardous, it cannot be hazardous waste because hazardous waste is regulated by hazardous waste combustion rule. If it is a non-hazardous solid waste, and if you burn any amount of waste, it will be under Section 129 rule. And if it is under Section 129 rule, you have to follow and comply with the rule, whatever the rule specifies, depending on, under Section 129, there are 6 rules. So depending on which rule applies to your unit, we don't distinguish whether it's a major or minor unit. Having said that, if it is an air curtain incinerator, and if you believe, and if you have determined with your state authority or the federal government that that air curtain incinerator will be an other solid waste incineration rule, rule incinerator. And that air curtain incinerator is burning only wood waste and then clean lumber and yard waste. You don't need Title V requirement. You only have to meet the opacity requirement. But if that air curtain incinerator is burning other waste like paper, cardboard, plastic, rubber, like municipal type solid waste, then you have to comply with the 9 numerical limits and meet with the testing and monitoring. But we do, as I mentioned in my slides, we do have very high increased amount of flexibilities because we do understand that certain units just don't have the design to comply with stack testing, which is why, again, I have encouraged people to go through the rule or, ask EPA to hold a public hearing so that they can tell us or submit comments.
Okay, and thank you. I think that in the interest of time, we'll ask one more question, and then the other ones you can either stay on and answer yourself before you leave, or we'll get them to you by email. But the next question would be, would a burn-off oven be regulated under this rule?
So a burn-off oven, if it will depend, like I wish I could have a one-liner answer because it all depends on the applicability of the rule. So if your burn-off oven is, again, turning out to be a very small municipal waste combustor, or an institutional waste incinerator, yes, your burn-off-oven will be regulated. But if it turns out to be, you know, a SISWE unit, which is Commercial Industrial Solid Waste Incineration Unit, then it will be regulated under SISWE rule and will not be regulated under this rule. So it really depends on the applicability of which rule applies to your unit. Nancy, I don't think I can hear you.
You're right. I muted myself because I am answering a few questions that I can answer for you. So there are a few other questions if you want to open them up, and you're welcome to type the answer. It's pretty self-explanatory. Otherwise, Lisa and Rhonda, I think we'll move on to.
Yeah.
Sure. I apologize. I have to jump off to the other meeting, but I'll be sure to answer those questions by if you could please send me an email.
Yes.
Thank you,
we will do
Nancy.
that.
All right, thank you so much, Nabanita.
And I just want to clarify one thing, that if you have any questions on Nabanita's presentation, you are welcome to contact me, Rhonda, Wright, or her. But if you have comments or questions, comments on the actual rule, you have to submit those online. So I just want to make sure that is clear, that only submit to me questions from her presentation on today.
Thank you, Rhonda. Yes, that's very important. Please, if you have any questions on the rule, please submit it to the docket.
Thank you, Nabanita.
Thank you.
And so now the next person that we have from OAQPS will be Adam. Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Take me just a sec to. All right. So I'm going to talk to you today about the National Air Quality Training Program. This is a program that in some way, shapes, or form predates EPA. So this has been going on since the 70s. And the primary focus of this training program has been state and local air agencies. It broadened out to tribes in the 90s. And we're doing a pretty major overhaul. So we're opening this up to all air quality professionals are going to be in some way, shape, or form included as our stakeholders in this. That process is a pretty big one. So we have made a roadmap. All right, I go over this one. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
There we go. That's the button to hit. So we put together a roadmap over 5 years to overhaul this program. So the first couple of years are pretty heavy on rebuilding the infrastructure. One of those pieces of infrastructure are the curricula. There were some curricula that organized what trainings were offered, but there wasn't real discipline in staying in those lanes when new training material was developed. So over the years, it was pretty difficult to identify what learning plan people should use in order to fulfill their learning objectives. Another major one for us is to prioritize which training comes first. And then the final one that I'll talk today is our current learning management system is ELearning. And ELearn is a pretty old learning management system. It's proprietary and it's no longer being maintained by the contractor. So there are some, so we're moving to a new suite, if you will, of different approaches to provide trainings to all of our different stakeholders. Just to give a little bit of background, I think like many training programs, this one had seen some heydays and since 2005 had been sort of in decline as far as resources. It had at one point in time had 15 FTEs, but by 2014 and 2018, it was run with 1 to 2 staffs. Because of the lack of staff, the partnerships that really are necessary for this training program to be a success had broken down. The learning management system was outdated, and it really used an old approach to developing and delivering training, which was based on classrooms. Their ability to produce new trainings was down to about 1 training every other year. We are up to currently, so we have a new office director, and he has identified training as something that is a priority for OEQPS. So we are currently up to myself plus 10 FTEs, and we are in the process of replacing ELearning with a new learning management system. So as I said, we have to rebuild the infrastructure while developing the training. So in the first 2 years, so FY20 and FY21, we were really focusing on rebuilding the partnerships and connecting with the stakeholders. As I mentioned briefly, this was a program that was primarily, in fact, almost exclusively targeted towards state and local air agency staff. But there are a lot of folks who have similar needs. So we are rebuilding some of those connections with our existing stakeholders and broadening it out to other folks. The program was also pretty dependent upon contractors to develop the training, and we identified the skill sets that would be necessary to move that training in-house to help make this more sustainable in the long run and a lot more effective. So in the first 2 years, we will go from a half a training a year to producing 4 to 5 per year while we rebuild all that infrastructure. And then starting in FY22, our focus is going to be developing the training, and we are going to develop up to 20 courses a year. And that will require the participation of subject matter experts from across our stakeholders. OEQPS does not have the capacity to develop that much with just our subject matter experts. So the first step in this was to identify what do students need to learn. There's some good stuff in ELearning, and there's a lot of outdated material that once was high quality, but just really isn't what it needs to be anymore. So we decided to step away from what exists and just engage with our stakeholders to try to, if you will, start from scratch. What is needed for people to bring in air agency staff, to bring in new staff, and to help staff progress from new staff through subject matter experts to educate that next generation of air professionals. And then we wanted to build this curricula around learning objectives and integrate them with some of the more modern approaches to delivering training, such as a learning management system, and help students design their own learning plans so that instead of us providing very set in stone approaches to trainings or just have folks pick one course at a time, we're going to build in that flexibility to allow folks to design their own training plans. So we went through a pretty comprehensive process for about 6 to 9 months of getting stakeholder feedback from across states and locals, the EPA regions and OEQPS to identify what is necessary. And we identified these 8 curricula. The first one is air pollution basics. So this curriculum is really focused on people who are new to it, whether they're air professionals at the university, industry, or starting new in at a state agency that don't have a big, strong background in the Clean Air Act or in regulation. This is that curriculum that will help folks get acclimated to this world and start their learning process. The rest of these are oriented on professional tasks at state or local air agencies. That doesn't mean that's all that it's limited to, but we needed to set our default curriculum, if you will. What's the default starting place? So we oriented around job titles, and with some work from Rhonda and a few other folks, we feel that it's a good starting place for folks from outside of agencies also to get started. I won't go through those individually because you'll have these slides. The step that we are just completing now is to then take all of our existing training material and map it to our new curriculum. And a lot of this involves taking single courses that were taught, in some cases in classrooms over 3 or 4 days, and breaking them down into modular courses so that a particular course can now reside across multiple curriculum. And then sometimes a particular module can exist in several curriculum at once. The idea here is we treat each curriculum based on what are the learning objectives. What is it that a learner needs to start as a novice in this curriculum and advanced all the way to a subject matter expert. So we're finishing taking the existing material and mapping it to our new curriculum. what the benefits of this are to help us, in addition to creating a modularized approach for folks, but to help identify where our gaps are so that we can focus on developing new material on those gaps. Down the long term, it creates a mechanism for us to prioritize this training and helps us stay focused. That was really something that hurt the program in previous iterations, was it lost its focus. Again, you've got these slides, so I won't go through these, but our target for 2020 was to complete 4 to 5 courses, and we've exceeded that. I will say hats off to my staff. In addition to exceeding this, the timeline for our learning management system has been greatly enhanced because of the pandemic. So I think we can take this as a proof of concept that we are able to meet some of these goals that we laid out. In addition to updating or developing new courses, we've also taken 15 existing course materials and converted them to e-learning format.
Just a heads up, about 5 minutes.
Yep,
If we want to have 5 minutes for questions, then great, thanks.
Yeah. The replacement for apt eLearn is really a suite of different approaches depending on the stakeholder. And this comes out of a lot of what is required to operate in the federal government. So we are standing up a new learning management system for our state and local tribal or agency staff. In the short term, folks from outside of these agencies will use the current apt eLearn system until we can transition to a web-based platform for folks to access these. And then EPA staff will be using the EPA's learning management system. So the learning management system it was originally designed to be launched next summer, but we are going to stand that up by sometime in November. And we should have the web-based platform up by December, I think, is our current estimation. For those who are familiar with apt eLearn, ideally what we were going to do in this time was to modify and update a lot of this course material, but given the expedited schedule that we've had to operate on, we are going to migrate a lot of the existing material up there and just embrace continual improvement. So we will move a lot of the material over, and then we'll just update it over the next year or two as we have time. I think that's the gist of what you all need to know, and still leave some time for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Adam. Nancy, do we have any questions for Adam right now?
I believe we have one question for Adam. Will you add regulation-specific training like NESHAP versus just permitting, compliance, and other broad-based subjects? And then there's another follow-up question. So the first question is from Tony, will you add regulation-specific training like NESHAP versus permitting, compliance, and other broad-based subjects?
So the curricula do go into the different forms of rulemaking far beyond just permitting. And so that process on how it's done, what's involved, how to be involved, those are all going to be covered in that. And we're currently, over the next couple of years, I think we've already identified those as some priorities for us to develop.
Great. The next question is, will we, meaning a small business environmental assistance program, be able to submit training we developed to the Cornerstone LMS system?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. We haven't quite worked out the process yet. So we've identified, or we actually built a content management system ourselves. For those of you who are familiar with SharePoint, we had some folks go in and build a SharePoint system so that we can receive material from folks such as yourselves, and we would wholeheartedly encourage that. The part we have to figure out is what level of review do we need to go through to be able to put it on the system. So that's something that's being worked out right now. For those who understand some of our processes, we are looking to stand this up as what's called a partnership website, which does expedite the review process, requiring less review. From the technical standpoint, we've got that figured out. From the bureaucratic side of things, we're working that out, and we'll reach out to you and let you know when we finalize that.
Great. And so Adam, would you be the main contact on that?
Yep, and so I've left you my contact information here so that if you have further questions on this, please reach out to me. I'll either be able to answer it or I'll field it out to some of my staff who know a lot of the details better than I do.
Great. So from a review standpoint, you are meaning a technical review as well as maybe a grammatical or AP type of review.
So I'm mostly worried about the technical review and making sure that someone else's interpretation is consistent with EPA's interpretation. That's really, so one, we'll have to make sure that the material is what we consider to be technically accurate. And then two, no matter how hard people try, it's very easy to stray in what the federal government considers to be interpretation, regulatory interpretation. And those are the challenges. As far as grammatical review, we can handle that. That's not a problem at all.
Okay. And then the last question Tony asked is very specific. Will it accept articulate storyline HTML5?
Yes, all of the above.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Tony, thank you. Those are great questions.
All right, let's see if we have one more question coming in here. And then another one from Linnell says, who will have access to the training? The public?
Yes. I was trying to go through it fairly quickly to allow for questions, but when out of the gate, the public, anybody, international universities, general, Joe and Jane citizen in the United States can access these trainings on apt ELearn. We are going to build a better system that is a web-based platform for the general public and small businesses.
Excellent.
And
okay.
that I hope we will have stood up. I think it's perhaps ambitious, but I'm hoping that we can have that part stood up by December.
Wow, that's great. That's great. That is ambitious. Any other questions? And I'm not seeing any. So Lisa, I want to turn it over to you. Thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Adam, Rhonda, and Nabanita. We really appreciate those updates and very good session, very informative. So now we're going to be transitioning to our next